One of the most famous British gangsters in modern history, who was known for helping people, is Ronnie and Reggie Kray, also known as the Kray twins. Ronald Ronnie and Reginald Reggie Kray were born on October 24, 1933, in Hoxton, East London. They were identical twins and grew up in the poverty-stricken East End. Their father, Charles Kray, was often absent, and their mother, Violet, was extremely protective of them. As children, they were fiercely loyal to each other and frequently got into fights. Their aggressive nature made them feared among their peers. In their teenage years, they became accomplished amateur boxers, showing discipline and skill in the ring. However, their natural inclination toward violence led them down a darker path. The Kray twins were conscripted into the British Army in 1952, but quickly went AWOL, assaulting a corporal and escaping from their barracks. After being arrested, they spent time in a military prison before being dishonorably discharged. This experience only hardened them and pushed them further into a life of crime. Upon returning to the East End, they began running protection rackets, forcing local businesses to pay them for protection against violence. Their gang, the Firm, grew in power, dealing in armed robbery, arson, fraud, and extortion. By the late 1950s, they had built a powerful criminal empire. They also became nightclub owners, running several high-end clubs in the West End of London. Their businesses attracted celebrities like Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland, and Diana Dawes, as well as politicians and socialites. Despite their violent activities, the Krays cultivated a Robin Hood-like image. They provided financial help to struggling families, prevented evictions, and gave gifts to the elderly. Some saw them as protectors of the East End, and they were often treated like local heroes. However, this image was carefully constructed. Behind the scenes, the Krays were ruthless, using extreme violence to maintain control. As their power grew, so did their arrogance and brutality. Two key murders led to their downfall. 1. George Cornell, 1966. A member of a rival gang, the Richardson Gang, Cornell was shot in the head by Ronnie Kray at the Blind Beggar pub in Whitechapel. Ronnie, who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, killed Cornell in broad daylight, showing his growing instability. 2. Jack the Hat McVitie, 1967. A former associate, McVitie fell out with the Krays after failing to carry out a hit for them. Reggie Kray stabbed him to death at a party, an act that would later seal their fate. By the late 1960s, Scotland Yard had been gathering evidence against the Krays for years. However, fear of retaliation prevented witnesses from speaking out. In 1968, Detective Superintendent Leonard Nipper Red launched a major operation, finally arresting the twins, along with several members of the Firm. In 1969, the Krays were sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 30 years for the murders of Cornell and McVitie. This was one of the longest sentences ever given to criminals in Britain at the time. Ronnie Kray was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and spent most of his sentence in Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility. He died of a heart attack in 1995 at the age of 61. Reggie Kray remained in prison until he was released on compassionate grounds in 2000, suffering from terminal cancer. He died later that year at the age of 66. The Kray twins remain one of the most infamous gangsters in British history. Their story has been told in numerous books, documentaries, and films, including The Krays, 1990, starring the Kemp brothers; Legend, 2015, starring Tom Hardy as both twins. Despite their reputation for generosity, they were ultimately violent criminals whose legacy is a mix of fear, admiration, and infamy.